Now, what if I told you two men once walked into one of the most famous jewellery stores in the world and calmly walked out with £40 million in diamonds? And the strange thing is, for the first few minutes, nobody even realised it was a robbery. I'm James, creator of Blackwell Jewellers, and I've been making jewellery for over 35 years, and I run a small chain of jewellers and pawnbrokers here in the UK. So when a story like this happens in the jewellery world, it absolutely fascinates me. And I think you're going to love this one. The place, Graff Diamonds on New Bond Street in London. Now, Graff isn't just any jewellery shop. It's the kind of place where diamonds can cost millions of pounds each. The windows sparkle with some of the most expensive jewellery in the world. And on that afternoon, two very well-dressed men walked up to the door. They look like wealthy clients, smart suits, calm voices, the kind of people who might casually say, "Yes, I'd like to see that diamond ring, please." Security buzzed and they let him inside. The staff smiled politely, and a few minutes it looked exactly like a normal luxury jewellery sale. But what nobody realised was this: those two men were about to carry out the biggest diamond robbery Britain had ever seen. Because what the staff didn't know was that the men standing in front of them weren't even showing their real faces. And the way they managed that was something straight out of a Hollywood movie. And that's where the story gets even more interesting. Now, it's the part of the story that sounds like something from a Hollywood film, because the two men who walked into Graff Diamonds that day weren't actually showing their real faces at all. Weeks before the robbery even happened, the gang did something incredibly clever. They hired a professional makeover artist, a real expert, someone who normally worked on films, theatre shows and television. But when he was hired for this job, he was told something very simple: "We're making a music video. Nothing suspicious, nothing strange. Just two guys who needed a bit of special effects makeup." So the artist got the work. Now, for 4 hours, he carefully transformed their faces. He used liquid latex, which is a stretchy material that can change the shape of your skin. He added prosthetic pieces to slightly change their noses and cheeks. He altered the colour of their hair. He adjusted their skin tone. He even added small wrinkles and aged lines. Bit by bit, their faces started to change. And by the end of it, they looked like completely different people. Not like actors wearing silly masks, but real, believable people. The kind of disguise that could fool almost anyone. In fact, investigators later said the disguise was so good their own families might not have recognised them, which meant when they walked into Graff Diamonds, security cameras were recording faces they didn't actually exist. But disguise alone weren't enough, because Graff Diamond wasn't like any other jewellery shop. This place had serious security, locked doors, carefully controlled entry, and diamonds inside worth millions of pounds each. If this robbery was going to work, they would need a plan that was extremely precise. Before the robbery day arrived, the gang spent weeks studying the store, watching, learning, and figuring out exactly which diamonds they wanted. And the way they prepared for that robbery was almost like planning a military operation. And that's where the real story begins. Now, robbing one of the most famous jewellery stores in the world isn't something you can just wake up and decide to do. You can't simply walk in and grab diamonds worth millions. Places like Graff Diamonds are designed to stop exactly that. Graff Diamonds on New Bond Street was famous for its incredible jewellery, but it was also famous for its security. The entrance worked like an airlock. You couldn't just walk in from the street. First, you stepped into a small entrance area. Then security would decide whether to unlock the second door and let you into the showroom. It was designed to stop thieves getting inside. But the gang knew something important. If you looked like a wealthy customer, security would let them through. And that's exactly what they planned. They also studied the display cabinets inside the store. Not all cabinets held the same pieces. Some held jewellery worth tens of thousands, others held pieces worth millions. The robbers wanted the very best ones, so they memorised exactly where those pieces were kept, which cabinets, which trays, which items, almost like someone walking into a supermarket with a shopping list. But their shopping list wasn't bread and milk. It was diamond rings, bracelets, necklaces and watches worth millions of pounds. And they didn't just plan the robbery itself, they planned the escape. Multiple getaway cars, different routes and accomplices waiting outside. The idea was simple: if everything went perfectly, they would disappear before the police even knew what had happened. And finally, on the afternoon of August 6, 2009, the plan was ready. Two men stepped into a London taxi and headed straight for Graff Diamonds. Looking calm, looking wealthy, looking exactly like the kind of customers the shop welcomed every day. And for the first few minutes after they arrived, everything looked completely normal. But that calm moment was about to disappear very quickly. So imagine the scene. It's a warm afternoon in London, August 2009. Busy streets, expensive shops, people walking past with shopping bags, and outside one of the most famous jewellery stores in the world, two very smartly dressed men step out of a black London taxi. They look like they belong there, and that was exactly the point. The two men walked calmly up to the entrance of Graff Diamonds on New Bond Street. Now remember, this wasn't a normal shop door. Graff used a double security entrance, almost like an airlock. You step into a small area first and security decides if you're allowed in the showroom. The men pressed the buzzer. Security looked at them. Smart suits, calm body language. One of them was even wearing leather gloves. Normally that might look suspicious, but wealthy jewellery buyers sometimes do wear gloves when handling expensive pieces, so security buzzed them through. Inside the store, everyone was quiet and elegant. Glass cabinets filled with sparkling diamonds, jewellery worth hundreds of thousands, even millions of pounds. A sales assistant greeted them politely. One of the men pointed to a diamond ring in the window, a 2-carat diamond ring. "Could we see that one, please?" The assistant smiled and opened the cabinet. She brought the jewellery to the table. The men looked at it carefully. They chatted calmly, asked questions. Everything felt like completely normal luxury jewellery sale. For a few minutes, nobody suspected a thing, but then everything changed. Because the moment the jewellery was within reach, one of the men reached into his jacket. Now instead of pulling out a wallet, he pulled out a handgun. And in a split second, a quiet afternoon in London's most famous jewellery store turned into a £40 million armed robbery. Now this is the moment when everything changed. 1 second, it looked like a normal jewellery sale, and the next second, guns were pointing across the counter. The second man did the same. Suddenly, the quiet showroom filled with fear. The robbers pointed the guns at the staff and gave very clear instructions. "Stay calm, don't move, do exactly what we say." This wasn't a smash and grab robbery. They weren't smashing cabinets or running around wildly. Everything was controlled. Everything was planned. They already knew exactly which pieces they wanted. At one point, a shot was fired, described as a warning shot. That loud crack echoed through the store and made one thing very clear: these men were serious. The staff now understood this was a real armed robbery, and the safest thing to do was follow their instructions. One of the sales assistants, Petra, was forced to open the high value display cabinet. Diamond rings, bracelets, necklaces, watches worth an enormous amount of money. And the robbers were working quickly, very quickly, because they knew something important. They only had a few minutes before the situation could spiral out of control. And what happened next was astonishing, because in just a few minutes, the robbers managed to collect 43 separate pieces of jewellery, some of them worth millions of pounds each. And they were about to walk out of the store with a bag containing one of the most valuable pools of diamond Britain has ever seen. The robbers placed each piece into their bag, but they weren't grabbing things randomly. They knew exactly what they wanted, almost like someone following a shopping list. They asked for specific items, specific cabinets, specific trays. That tells investigators something very important. The gang had clearly studied the store beforehand. They knew where the most valuable jewellery was kept, and they knew exactly how to get it fast. Within minutes, the bag was filled with diamonds worth nearly £40 million, all now sitting inside one small bag. But the robbers still had one big problem. They had to get out of the shop and disappear into London, and they needed to make sure nobody stopped them. So as they prepared to leave the store, they made a move that made the situation even more dangerous. Now, escaping a robbery like this is the hardest part, because once you leave the store, the clock is ticking. Police could arrive any minute, and the robbers knew they needed a few extra seconds to get away. So they made a dangerous decision. They took a hostage. As the robbers prepared to leave Graff Diamonds, they forced sales assistant Petra to walk with them at gunpoint. They pushed her out the shop into the busy street outside. People walked along New Bond Street suddenly saw something very strange. Two suited men holding a woman at gunpoint and a bag full of diamonds. It was like something straight out of a movie. The robbers used the hostage to stop anyone interfering while they escaped. Outside, they fired shots into the air to create panic and confusion. Then they jumped into the first getaway car, a BMW waiting nearby. But that was only the first step of their escape, because the gang had planned something very clever. They knew police would quickly start searching for that car, but the plan was to switch vehicles multiple times. Driving away, the BMW eventually crashed into a taxi during the escape. But the robbery team kept moving. They abandoned the car. The diamonds were transferred to another getaway vehicle. Then eventually a high-powered motorbike was used to carry the jewels away through the London traffic. Piece by piece, the gang vanished into the city, and for the moment it looked like they just pulled off the perfect diamond robbery. But despite all the careful planning, all the disguises, and all the complicated escape plan, someone in the gang made one very small mistake. A mistake so simple it would eventually help police unravel the entire robbery. Now, up until this point, the robbery looked almost perfect. Professional disguises, careful planning, multiple getaway vehicles, millions of pounds of diamonds. But criminals often get caught because of one simple thing. Now, in this case, it was something most of us carry in our pocket every single day. After the robbery, police quickly began searching for getaway cars. Inside that car, they started looking for clues, fingerprints, DNA, anything that would help identify the robbers. And that's when they found something incredibly important, a mobile phone. It had been left wedged between handbrake and the driver's seat, most likely dropped in the chaos when the robbers switched vehicles. Now, this might sound like a small thing, but for the detectives, a mobile phone is like a treasure map, because inside a phone you can find contacts, call history, messages, and sometimes even location information. So investigators began analysing the phone. They looked at who it had called, who had called it, and how those numbers contacted to other people. Very quickly, a picture started to appear. The anonymous robbery was suddenly turning into a network of real people. Real names, real addresses, real connections, and slowly, piece by piece, police began to identify the gang behind one of the biggest jewellery robberies in Britain had ever seen. And once detectives had those names, they started pulling together hundreds of hours of CCTV footage across London. Taxi cameras, street cameras, shop cameras, and what they discovered next would completely unmask the people behind the £40 million diamond heist. So detectives began watching hundreds of hours of video. They tracked the taxi that dropped the robbers at Graff. They followed the movements of the getaway cars. They looked at where the vehicles were abandoned, and slowly the story of the robbery began to rebuild itself. At the same time, investigators were analysing the mobile phone. They explained the call history. They mapped out who had spoken to who, and very quickly a name began to appear again and again. Armin Kassir. Detectives now believed he was one of the key organisers behind the robbery. Once police had that name, things moved quickly. They started identifying other members of the gang, drivers, helpers, people involved in planning the escape. Eventually, several men were arrested and charged with crimes including robbery and kidnapping. When the case reached court, judges described the robbery as highly organised and extremely dangerous. Some of the gang members received long prison sentences, with Kassir reported to have been given more than 20 years. But even though the police had solved the crime, there was still one huge mystery left, because the robbers had stolen £40 million worth of diamonds. And despite all the arrests, most of those diamonds were never found. So the question still remains today, what actually happened to them? Now here's the part of the story that still puzzles people today, because although the robbers were caught, most of the £40 million worth of diamonds were never recovered. They simply disappeared. Graff Diamonds is known for something very clever. Many of their stones are laser inscribed. That means a tiny microscopic Graff logo is engraved inside the diamond. It's so small you need a jeweller's microscope to see it. The idea was simple. If a stolen diamond ever appears again, experts can identify it. But criminals who deal in stolen diamonds know something too. Diamonds can be cut again. A skilled diamond cutter can remove a tiny layer of the stone. That removes the inscription, and suddenly the diamond looks like a completely different stone. Investigators believe that's exactly what happened. Stolen jewellery was likely to be broken up, large diamonds recut, settings melted down, and the stones quietly sold on the international black market. Once that happens, tracking then becomes almost impossible, which means somewhere in the world today, people may still be wearing diamonds from the Graff robbery without even knowing it. And that's why this story fascinates people in the jewellery world, because it shows just how valuable and sometimes mysterious diamonds can be. And if you enjoy stories about the jewellery world, diamonds, and the incredible things that happen in this industry, make sure you subscribe, because we share new stories like this every week. And if you ever have any idea and you want something unusual made, get in touch. I'm James at Blackwell Jewellers. Thank you for watching.